Hey everybody, welcome to Leading Thriving Cities. This is our show where we shine a spotlight on leadership in public service, and we have deep conversations about sustainability and how we build a thriving future for our cities. My name is Chad Wright. I'm the founder of Forward Partners. Today's guest is Paul Grimes. He is the city manager, actually the longtime city manager after 8 years of McKinney, Texas. We have a great conversation about really the navigating job that is a city manager. You are helping an entire city and a council and a staff and the citizens navigate towards the future. And sometimes that's at a really high level and a low level. And he really digs into this idea very well. And we really get into this idea of the soft skills, which we reclassified as the people skills. These are going to be the key to the future, learning these people skills that allow us to create better cultures. There is an incredible amount of value in this conversation. I'm so glad for you to see it. Thank you for joining us today on Leading Thriving Cities. Paul, thank you so much for joining us here on Leading Thriving
My
Cities.
pleasure.
We're not going to tell people that this is the second take because we had technical issues, but thanks for joining us again. I love the idea of having city managers on here to really help people understand what your jobs are like and what the things you face on a regular basis. And so if there was one thing you could have people understand about your role, what would you have them understand?
Yeah. So it's, there are so many answers people could give to this question.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the way I look at it is if you really want to understand about a city managers are navigators.
Yeah.
We serve as the chief administrative officer, as chief executive of the organization, but fundamentally, so it's a commanding officer in a way, but we really the navigator. And I'm a former Navy guy, so bear with me with my Navy metaphors. But the navigator on the ship is the one who has to make sure that the ship's going in the right direction, and that the information you get it the best information possible to be able to navigate that ship forward. And in many respects, that's what the city manager's role is guiding the council, leading the council to a decision. And it's got to be on them, right? They cannot shirk from making a decision. Sometimes they don't want to make a decision because of political reasons or whatever. And you have to be sensitive to that and say, well, how about we go this way? Yeah. But we got to move forward, and here's how we can get you there. And that's where the professional city manager and staff can help guide the council toward making that decision. So, in my view, that's really fundamentally what a city manager does, and that's a way to capture it.
There's an interesting thing I'm thinking of just now, actually, where there's the high level navigation of where are we going very broadly in a very big way. And I'm guessing when you're driving a ship, 4 hours from now, here's where we're going to be. But right now, 5 minutes from now, what's our next turn? Yeah. What's our next thing? And so you're having to see it from both this really, really high 100,000 foot level, but also really down on the ground, down in the ocean. What is our next
That's a great point. And that is very much what it's about. You have your tactical stuff, right? The stuff that's right now.
Yeah.
And then you have your strategic leadership.
Yeah.
And in this role as a chief executive in a public organization, more so because you have to work with consensus. So in the private sector, problems are hard. Your solutions, I should say, are hard because you're innovating. You're trying to come up with something, but getting there is easier because you're pulling it. You're like, that's it. We got to do this, and we're all pulling this direction. In the public sector, with 7 different bosses, all with 7 different political priorities, the solutions sometimes are fairly straightforward, but getting there's harder because you got to build consensus. And that's really a fundamental difference between what you might find in the private sector and the public sector. And strategic leadership is something that you're going to see a lot more of as you get more senior in the organization. And our role is to try to foster all of those, right? Your sort of your tactical decision making. What do we need to do here? Place this on the agenda this week versus the next 2 weeks, or no, let's wait because there's something we should be mindful of here. This needs to happen first. Those are the tactical decisions. But you're sailing a course. You're going a certain direction. And we just have to get our counsel there and steer that bicycle while we pedal.
I'm thinking about that's how we function as the executive leader. But ultimately, I don't think people are aware of how draining that is, knowing just the daily schedule of I've got one meeting where we got to dig in the tactical. Let's get on the ground. Let's get dirty. Let's figure this out and be creative about a solution. And then I got to go up here And my next meeting, I've got to think at this level about how does this affect 200,000 people?
Yeah.
And this constant mode switching.
Totally.
It's really hard to do something.
It's hard to do, but for me, I like it because I get bored otherwise. No, seriously, when you
like
look
a
at
good challenge,
when
right?
you look at what we do in city management, your day-to-day meetings, I mean, you literally go from the tactical to the strategic, back to the tactical to just a constituent issue or whatever. You're having to shift gears all the time, and I find that actually fascinating.
So as you've navigated this career, I'm always curious with leaders, because when we're leaders, we're never done growing. It doesn't matter how far we get in our career, there's more development. What have you had to really overcome internally as you have grown in this career?
Well, gee, that's a great question. So for me, early in my career, I was ambitious, structured. I finished my master's, went to work in Anaheim, and I look back and I'm like, wow, how naive was I, and how, because, you're a hard charger.
Yeah.
And I made great relationships, but I also look and I'm like, boy, that was cringy. Did I really do that? Or did I really, or is that really what was on my mind then? And of course, over the years, you mellow out a little bit because you've, as I tell people, the hands of, or the banister is worn smooth by the grip of many hands. And over the years, the grips of those hands kind of wears you a little bit, and you become a little bit more nuanced to understand nuance, which oftentimes young folks in their career don't get nuance, right? Yeah. And I think that, that's kind of the main thing that I've learned about myself, and I would advise folks is, be patient. It doesn't mean you sit and let things happen. Sometimes you have to go out there and seize the opportunity. Yes. But the more important thing is read, learn, keep your mind malleable, and learn how others may do it. We can't possibly know in our lived experience as humans all the things we need to know, particularly in an environment with more and more information. But you can sure sit down and read. You can control that. You can read. You can learn. You can see how others may have done things. I'm a big fan of the arts. I was a liberal arts guy myself, and I think that's the key. I think science and technology we're in a digital world. Yeah. We're in a world where that is the world of AI is the future, and that's going to be the technicians and but who's going to build the crosswalks across those technology domains? Yeah. Who's going to help us do that? That's where the arts come in, and that's where the people skills. People skills, in my view, are going to be more important than ever. Yes, and I think those are things that you develop over time. You develop, and we should encourage our folks to work on those people skills, work on those leadership skills, how to connect with people, because that is really what's going to get us through, get this transition, this great transition, which I think we're in right now, is moving from one industrial age to another. Yeah. I'm really curious because we refer to them often as soft skills. Yeah. And coming up in the Navy, coming up in the area you came up in, the area I came up in, we weren't really taught soft skills. And so I'm curious, as you have developed in your career, what does that look like now? How are you continually kind of honing those to get better and better at it? Because this new generation coming in, they are demanding more in terms of the people skills. I don't know why we call them soft skills, because they're really hard to master. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. If I've had it described for me, they said, science and engineering, it's complicated and it's hard, but the outcomes. When you're dealing with people, that's the hard stuff. It is. So really you don't know the outcome because it's complexity. Yeah. Complexity by definition is uncertainty. Yes. I think it's starting from a place of humility, starting from a place of really not knowing the answer. Even if you think you know the answer, stop and ask yourself about your own biases. There's 123 known biases in the human mind that we know of, and there may be more depending on how you slice and dice them. And we're intentional about it. I find it fascinating because I actually think that many of the issues and challenges we deal with in political and fighting social challenges, whatever, a lot of it starts from people just being biased. They have certain preconceived notions and they don't want to listen. And I would say if you really want to develop soft skills, here's my suggestion. Learn how to listen. And listen more, because if you're talking, you're not learning. So learn how to listen and start from a place of humility that maybe you don't know all the answers, and just humor somebody. The very process of listening and seeing somebody else, right? Having somebody be seen is developing soft skills. Yeah. And then next thing you know, it's it starts to feel pretty good or pretty normal.
Yes.
And so I would tell folks who are like, man, I really struggle with that. I'm an engineer in the civil engineering department. Here's my recommendation. Start here and see where it takes you.
Yeah. There's an empathy required to consider the person on the other side of the table. And I think that's where we struggle, because our whole focus as a company is how do we get leaders to be healthier? And what we find is when we're really healthy as leaders, there's an outward focus. It is all about, I want to find solutions. I want to be creative. I'm here to serve you through this process. When we're less healthy, it's all about us. How does this affect me? How can I get this solution faster? Because I need to get this done. And ultimately, it's the same actions in a lot of ways, but it feels and is received very differently.
Right.
And so that health is required for that. And I think that's where we were taught as leaders, here's the boxes to check. But now we're learning, here's how you have to show up to actually check those effectively.
Yeah.
And it is often the opposite of what we've been taught. Like we learned.
Oh, no doubt about it. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so I mean,
Yeah.
it was hierarchy.
Yes.
And it starts from the very early days. It starts, whether churches or your family or even in schools, your principals at the top and everybody else's.
Yep.
And we were conditioned. So it's hard to change that mold. And I tell our employees with our HPO model, I said, it's going to feel weird. Yeah. It's going to feel weird as a supervisor. It's going to feel weird as a what we call a followership. You have to develop followership to learn how to work in this. And when we ask them, no, you're in charge. And it may feel weird to them when they come to work. They're used to having somebody tell them what their work plan is. Yes. Well, we want you to tell us what the work plan should be.
Yeah.
Right.
We're getting you a goal. How are you going to get there?
And so you have to kind of break that mold a little bit.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge. Yeah. Something else you talked about was the patience, especially early in your career. I'm fascinated by this season because early in your career, especially in your 20s, some bleeding into your 30s for a lot of people, there's this drive of, I've got to get there fast.
Yeah.
I should be further. I should be doing more. And that drive often causes us, a lot of our work is around burnout. It causes us to develop these habits of just saying, yes, I'll take on more. And sometimes that's good. Like you said, there's times you got to be intentional. You got to go make it happen. Sometimes it's not always good. And we build that muscle of just yes. And then we get to hit our age and suddenly there's this burnout because we can't actually do that sustainably. Right. And so that is that patience piece. We know what it should look like in your 20s and 30s. It should look like understanding you're on a 40, 50, 60-year journey with this career. Slow down. Enjoy the moment. Reflect.
Stop and smell the flowers.
Yeah, have some gratitude. Yeah. So what does patience look like at this season in your career?
Ooh. Well, I'll answer that in a second, but the first thing I'm going to say is I was totally guilty of what you talked about, when it comes to saying yes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm a pleaser, right? I mean, that's and I think a lot of servant leaders are. We feel like we want to please. We're serving others, and you feel like you have to either take on additional things. And like most people, if you want to rise up in the organization, you want to be in a position of leadership, you have to kind of be ambitious, and so you have to balance that. Historically, and I generally would take on a lot of things, but I also know how to get away, and I. In the Navy, we called it work hard, play hard, right? And so, and then as I got older, I stopped playing so hard, but that's
fun looks different.
Yeah, fun looks different for sure. So what does patient look like today as I get older and more advanced or more senior, I should say seasoned in my career?
Yes.
So I think it's finding time. Now I'm there. Some managers are really good about boundaries, really good. And I'm not as good at it. I just know my counsel, and I know the things and I know what I'm capable of and what my boundaries are and what I can do. In many respects, I think we're built for this. So if you're built for this type of job, you can take on some things. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll get away for vacations. My wife and I like to travel. We take the kids, we'll go out of the country or whatever, and it's great. That for me is a great cleansing, therapeutic effect over what we can do to get away from work. But patience for me, it's really just being patient with my elected officials that I work with, understanding where they're coming from, trying to explain to them, hey, maybe you ought to think about this, or maybe this is something you want to consider that you may not have considered before, or here's why we do this. And we spend time, and oftentimes it's repeating the same thing over and over. Like,
yes,
it surprises us. And you can get very frustrated sometimes by saying, geez, I swear I've explained this 10 times. Yeah. but you have to do that.
Well, that's
part of
ultimately
it.
what communication is. If communication, people think of communication as, I need to get this out of my brain and into yours.
Yeah.
Communication is, I want to be heard. Well, often to be heard, it requires 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. It is this over and over. And when we understand that, that's the journey we're on. We're more patient with it. When we think it's just, I've done it once, so I'm through, we're not.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to parenting, right?
Yeah.
How many times do we have to tell our kids something before it finally sunk in? How many years did it take? Sometimes decades.
Decades, maybe, because it hasn't worked yet. So I will say, now my youngest, I have 3 boys, and my youngest one, they're all, they're all about the same age. So my oldest is 21, the 20, and then I have, my youngest is 17. He's a senior in high school.
Yeah.
And as they were growing up, they all played youth sports and activities and stuff. And so that's how I got away. Is I absolutely loved going to their games. And I tell people, city management, while it is a very, very time consuming job, you also, it was great for raising a family. It really was. I came home every night. I didn't have to travel. Yep. So I look at it from a point of gratitude and perspective. I know people who have, they may have successful careers and they're doing well, but they have to travel a lot.
Yeah, they're gone 50
They have to be road warriors, right? Yeah. They're consulting or whatever it may be. And I didn't have to do that. I was able to make, all my kids' games, except for maybe on a council meeting night. But for the most part, I was there. And, I was able to lay my head on my bed every night for the most part, occasional travel, but not that much. And so it's worked out well for us. And I try to keep that in perspective and say, you know what? Every job has its burdens and its challenges, but this has actually worked out well for us.
That's a really interesting perspective, because I know with city management, it can be all consuming. And I think the people pleaser inside of a lot of city managers allows it to be all consuming. Yeah. And so I know some that have not necessarily had that same journey of, this was really good for my family. I know a lot that would say this was not great for my family. And I think the difference is those boundaries, that ability to say, hey, I'm not going to make all my kids' games, but I'm going to make 80% of them.
That's right.
And the beauty is that my kids are the same age. I've got 24, 21, and 19.
Oh, great.
And so it's funny to me how often we talk about their youth. They don't remember the times I wasn't there. They remember the times I was. Right. And even though I wasn't at the majority of them, they still remember those fondly. And so there's this idea of setting up these boundaries to say, what is truly important for my family? And can I still do that while being beholden to the public and to the council and to all these different pressures? And there are ways of navigating. I think you're probably proof of that.
That's just balancing, and that's an art. And some people are better at it than others.
Have you always been good at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I mean, I think I've always been pretty good at knowing how to draw those boundaries. I've worked for some people who, fortunately, have respected those boundaries, or have at least said, "Listen,
that is so helpful, isn't it?
I'm available on my cell phone. I can take phone calls, but I may be at dinner." And they understand that. And they're like, I get it. You're at dinner. Let's talk about this later, whatever.
Yes.
And so, you have to work for folks who recognize that as well. And we have 7 bosses. So they all are very good, though, at respecting that and giving us time. But I also make sure they know that, if you need to talk or if there's an issue, you call me. It's that's my job. You pay me to do this.
And that's kind of the interesting part, is there's a moment when they do call and you have the choice. Do I pick this up right now, or do I say, hey, I'm at dinner. Can I call you back in a couple hours? And that's the boundary, is the willingness to say, I'm at dinner. I'm a human being. I have a family. Right. And that's where I think a lot of city managers struggle, is that boundary. They will immediately pick it up because fear says there's something bad on the other side of this call.
Right.
And that fear drives them to make a choice that's not good for them or their family.
It's either fear or it's anxiety or it's a desire for control. Because we all are. We're all here because we want to have control. We feel like, I better know, because if I don't take this call, I'm not going to be pleasing, or I'm not going to be in control of the situation.
Yes.
And we have to be willing to let that go. And I've got 4 assistant city managers, 4 really good ones. Yeah. And I know they can all step up and do. Yes. They're all ready to be city manager now. Yeah. Right. And you got to let them, do it. Or on your phone, you say, sorry, can't talk right now. The auto replies. Yeah. I do that oftentimes. Yes. Sometimes I'm on the treadmill working out. I'm like, I can't take a call. I'm working out, Yes. So,
and the interesting part is the world still spins.
That's right.
And I think that's the thing that we struggle with all the time, is when we set boundaries, we find out that things can actually wait. There are true emergencies. There are life and death emergencies, even in city management. most of them don't rise to that level.
Right.
Most of them are simple and can be handled later. And it's this art of figuring that out and learning how to do that. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle because of the fear.
That's right.
And y'all are in an interesting industry where you can be doing a phenomenal job. And all it takes is a political change and you get fired immediately. Sure. And that generates and creates this, I think, level of fear that doesn't exist in a lot of organizations. If you look at a CEO leading a 1,400 person company, they're not necessarily as worried about instantly getting fired if they're doing a good job. If you're putting up good numbers, you're fine.
That's right.
And in city management, that's not always true. And so I think that creates an environment
it's like
of anxiety.
Coaching. I mean, think about coaches. Sometimes coaches aren't the problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the general manager. Sometimes it's the owner. Sometimes it's whatever, other dynamics, or some even, some of the staff, they may not be doing a good job. But sometimes the most visible way to show a change, whether again with coaching or the city manager of a city council coming in, is let's replace the manager. Yes. It's the easy way, right? Yeah. Let's replace the manager. We're going to change things. Okay. Yeah. Oftentimes they find that that's not going to bring change, or it's going to backfire on them. Yeah. But I get it, and we all enter into this profession knowing that that's always a risk. Yeah. I will think that I think that one of the things that I've learned over the years nobody wants to be fired, nobody wants to be asked to leave, but you can't fear it. And I think earlier in your career as an early city manager, you kind of fear it. Yeah. And so you feel like you have to, know. Yeah. And you're not going to do a great job if you fear that all the time. You have to do what's right, have confidence in yourself, get good staff around you. Yeah. And do the best you can, and understand that, listen, at the end of the day, the way this works, the way democracy has to work in a council manager form of government, is you work at the pleasure of the city council. And if they want to make a change, it is what it is. It's a professional relationship. Yeah. And I don't want to be in the same place forever. I'm a little bit different maybe than some folks. You like a new adventure every once in a while. Exactly. I think, and I've been very open with my city council and community. I said, when they interviewed me 8.5 years ago, they said, how long do you want to be here? And I said, listen, I've got young kids. I would like to get them through high school. Mm-hmm. And, around the 10-year point, that's kind of when all bets are off. That's a reevaluation period. Yes. And it may be that I want to go do something else. And, but you have to have that independence. Yeah. I think is important for the city manager. Yeah. If you're beholden to everybody and you worry and you lay in bed at night thinking, oh, is this person, and we're all guilty of it sometimes. Yeah. But I think with seasoning, that tends to sort of mellow. Yeah, because ultimately there's Carl Jung is a psychologist, and he says the way the world works is whatever you resist persists. Yeah. So if you are resisting being fired, it's actually more likely to happen. Right. In the sales world, they say you don't ever sell scared. You're going to sell less. Right. And I think if you're managing scared, you're ultimately setting yourself up for that fall that you're trying so hard to keep from happening. Right. I think the strength of a manager to set boundaries, to say, here's how we're going to function, because I want the council to be successful. I want to be successful, but I also want to make sure we're all healthy in the process. Those boundaries are vital. And I think that type of manager, that type of leader, it's harder to look at them and say, we just got to get rid of them. Right. Because there is a strength there. There's a certainty of, I know I'm doing the right thing. Whether it pleases you or not, it's right. And I think there's something interesting there. And I think there are times where the managers have to step up and say, this is a principle that I'm not going to compromise on. I mean, we can change. It's often said, you can change your practices. Mm-hmm. You can compromise on practices. Yes. But you don't compromise on your principles. Yeah. And there are some things in initiatives that maybe, periodically, you can stand up and take a position that may be opposite of where the council is. Yeah. If you do it right and it's well thought out and you have the detail and the facts to back it up, they'll respect that too. Yeah. We had a case in McKinney where council was getting, they acted over our recommendation. And there were some comments made, and I had to come out and sort of defend staff. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I said, listen, we're never going to recommend. It was about a traffic signal and its proximity to another signal, and it was way closer than what engineering practices or principles would recommend. And we said, we're not going to recommend this. Mm. You're going to have to make this decision over our recommendation. Yes. I made that very clear for the public record. Yeah. And they respected it. They respected the fact that we're giving them the facts, we're giving them our professional opinion, and they can choose. Most of the time, they choose to accept them, but sometimes they're going to choose differently. Yeah. And you have to make that clear and let the public record show it. So they're accountable for making those decisions. Yeah.
Well, we've talked a little bit about people that are early in this career, that are early in thinking about public service. And I think we need more and more kids that are thinking, I want to go serve at a city. I want to serve at the local level. What advice would you give to somebody that's considering that or is early in that career?
Well, so I ambled into it. So it wasn't my, when I graduated college and then started graduate school even, I didn't know I was going to be in city management. I didn't really know that much about it. And I kind of found my way there, as I mentioned to you earlier. I would say stay open-minded. You don't have to follow a specific route to become a city manager. Yeah. Generally speaking, you go and get your MPA and you hire on as typically an analyst. And then you may work your way up into the city manager's office as an assistant to the city manager. And then you become maybe a department director, an assistant director, and work your way and then become an assistant city manager and city manager. That's the typical route. Right. And to some extent, I followed that, but I also worked in foreign direct investment for 5.5 years. I wanted some adventure. I wasn't, and I wanted to work in an international setting and understand a little bit more about international economic development. And I would say to folks, don't be afraid to try something new. Yeah. I was always tethered to the public sector. So everywhere I've worked, it's always been in a public service capacity, even if it was from the private sector side. Yeah. And for me, that was kind of fulfilling. That was a way to kind of stay connected, but also learn some different things. Yep. You will learn, you will have a much wider breadth of knowledge and experiences if you keep an open mind about some of those experiences. Yeah. And if you feel like you made the wrong choice, be patient. It'll come. You'll get back on track.
Kind of like the weather in Texas. If you don't like it right now, wait 10 minutes. It'll change.
That's right. There's a lot of young folks that want to hurry up and make their way up, and they're ambitious and they're climbers. And climbers are in every industry, right? You have climbers in all business lines. But I would counsel folks to be patient. Be patient and let it happen. Learn as much as you can learn. Take on what you can take on, right? I mean, within your boundaries. But if there's an opportunity to be on a committee for this project that seems really far removed. Maybe you're an analyst in the finance department and there's a Parks and Rec committee or group that's wanting to study something. Go do it. Go learn that and take care of yourself. The key thing is, I would tell young people, take care of yourself. Physically, yes, your temple. That's the only thing you can control, right? Is your own, habits and practice and take care of yourself. Be mentally fresh as much as you can.
Yeah. That's where, interestingly, early in the career, the boundaries, that's where the yes to literally everything tends to override those habits. It tends to override the space we need to care for ourselves.
Right. That's what you give up on, right?
Yes.
It supplants.
Exactly. And we're like, and it's interesting. It's kind of like, well, I'll get back to that when I'm older. Right. And I think we live for the top of the mountain. We live for the peak of our careers. But the problem is, if that's all we focus on, we don't find joy in the moment, day to day. Like, there is so much. I was doing a retreat with a library team the other day, and the purpose they wrote for their library was about enriching lives and making people's lives better. And if you're sitting there putting a dust jacket on to a book and you're thinking, boy, I hope I'm a director someday. I hope I'm a city manager someday. That's a miserable climb. But if you're sitting there thinking, this dust jacket is literally helping make somebody's life better, it just changes how you experience every single moment.
It's absolutely. And I think that's the key to flourishing is how are we connecting? How are we improving? If you're a public servant, if you're a servant leader, you're generally motivated by public service motivation. You want to make lives better. That's what motivates us.
Yes.
And so do it, right? Do that. Focus on that. Yeah. The rest of the stuff will come. Yeah. So that's kind of what I've seen over the years, and I've seen some really good folks. I mean, I've had a fairly normal career and fairly normal successes, and I've seen people that I admire, and I look at them, and I'm like, they got it figured out, and that's usually what those things are. They have a right approach and the right balance.
Yes,
and I'm always impressed by that.
I like that. What did you do in the Navy? I'm curious.
I was a surface warfare officer. Okay, so I was actually enlisted right out of high school. I wasn't ready for college, and I wanted to join the Navy and see the world. So I was an electronics technician, and I was shore duty in Naples, Italy. How good was that? I was a young man. We lived like expatriates. I mean, they gave us an allowance to live off base, and we had this beautiful villa.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. And I worked at the NATO base in Naples and on a crypto equipment, and it was just really cool, opportunity. Then I got a scholarship to go back under the ROTC program.
Yeah.
So I left Naples, tried to defer my scholarship for a year. I said, can I defer this for a year? They said,
my
no.
son did 4 years
That
in the
would have been
Navy.
great.
My oldest did.
Oh, good.
And he
Thank
spent
him
the
for his service.
entire time in Georgia.
Oh, you did?
That is not Naples.
Wow. Was it Coos Bay or where was it?
Kings
Okay.
Bay.
Kings
Yeah,
Bay,
right there, that submarine base. Yeah.
Right. All right. Coos Bay, I think, is Washington. But anyway, I went to college in the ROTC program. Then I went back in as an officer, and I was in the surface warfare community.
Yeah.
So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, when you got out of the Navy, was there anything in your head? Because I was reading over your bio, and McKinney right now is 220,000 people, a couple $100 million budget, overall an $888 million budget for everything. And did you ever envision coming out of the Navy? I'm eventually going to run an organization, 1,400 employees, almost $1 billion budget every year. Was that a thought in your head?
I had no idea. No, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what city manager was. I didn't know the difference. I didn't know anything about the forms of government, local government, all that stuff that you learn later. Deeply, I knew that I wanted to serve in some sort of a public service role.
Yeah.
I hoped that I would rise to a level of management. Maybe I'd be a director someday. And it's funny because I talk with my kids. I said, listen, whatever your vision is, it's kind of vague.
Yes.
But it's there and you're kind of marching in that direction. And I feel like, now that I'm older, I'm like, I what's the term they use now? You manifested. And that really kind of is what has happened.
Yeah.
And I feel very blessed, of course, and I'm very grateful for it. But that is true that was kind of my vision to serve in this kind of a role some way, but obviously the details I would not have known.
Well, and it's interesting that it's a direction as much as anything. And when I think like we're raising sons that are very similar ages, and I think we put so much pressure as a society on these kids that are 17, 18, 19, their brains are not even done forming yet. We're like, you need to know what you want to do for the rest of your life, which is such BS. Like that's crazy. But to have a direction and say, hey, I'm going to intentionally move in this direction. We'll see what happens. And I think that's more what they need probably than anything
What
else.
Motivates you? Yeah. What are the things? And sometimes you won't even know because you haven't been exposed to certain things.
Yes.
So give yourself a chance to be exposed to things that, to see things and that might trigger something. It might light a fire. But what motivates you and then follow that.
Yeah. And always trying to get them with the eye towards service to others. Whatever you do, two of my sons are not in the public service space. They're in the private sector. And for them, they're still serving. There's still this heart for, as I'm earning money, I'm serving other people. And I think that's the thing is when it is centered on how much money am I making and what rank am I, again, that's very inward focused. That's less healthy in terms of leadership. But when it's centered on, I get to get up and I get to serve people every day. That's the best feeling. And I don't think we emphasize that enough when they're young. And so they chase the money, they chase the title, and they find out ultimately all that's kind of hollow. And so this push towards service, I think, matters.
You mentioned the mountain a minute ago. And it reminded me of a book by David Brooks. David Brooks is a columnist with the New York Times. He's been all over. He's written a number. He was the guy who wrote Bobo's in Paradise. Yeah, if you remember that. Yeah, and then he's written a number of books since. And one of his more recent books is called The Second Mountain, and it's really a fascinating book because he talks about it, juxtaposes those folks who have climbed the mountain. Yes, whatever that may be. Yes, whether it's public service or private. Maybe they made a lot of money. Now they're trying to figure out what am I going to do the rest of my life. Yes, and next? The Second Mountain is basically chronicles individuals who have taken on a new calling and climbed that second mountain. It's usually focused around service. Yes, and it's fulfilling. Yeah. And it's extremely rewarding for folks. And they've found that their lives are much more fulfilled by climbing that second mountain. That's really a great read.
What's funny is our first coaching client we ever had was somebody who had spent 2 decades climbing to the top of this mountain. They got to the top of it, looked around and went, oh crap, what's next? Like I've got another 20, 30 years in my career. What do I do now? And it was such a fascinating way to start into the coaching business, help somebody figure out what does that second mountain look like.
That's right.
And you're right. It's all service. The more it is service focused, the more we're going to find in that. And I love the idea that if we can help people early in their career discover this, then more of their career is fulfilling. They see the impact they have. A lot of the work we do is really around how do we help organizations thrive? If your team is thriving, y'all are capable of anything. And ultimately, I think a thriving city staff is the foundation of a thriving city. And so what are some things that ultimately cities cities need to rethink to be more sustainable when it comes to their people, when it comes to how we take care of them?
Well, you talked about Thrive. I personally tried to model the principles from the book Flourish, which was Seligman. I can't remember, Martin Seligman.
Okay.
Great book. It's sort of in the positive psychology bent. His understudy was the Duckworth, who wrote Grit.
Yes.
And so Martin Seligman's book, Flourish, has some principles, and basically it's PERMA is the acronym. So if you follow, you have positive engagement, positive relationships, you have meaning, and achievement. I'm trying to remember what the other one is. It's eluding me right now.
I'm impressed because I couldn't remember half those.
But it's 5 of them. It's positive relationships, positive engagement, and I forget what the other E is, honestly, but it'll come to me. And then those are the happiness. Those first 3 are the happiness. You're a happier person if you have that. And that's what he focuses research on for years.
Yeah.
But he said there was something missing, and what he found out was missing was the meaning. And then achievement or accomplishment, the sense of, however that is, if you're a church group or a church entity or a faith-based institution, your sense of accomplishment is going to be very different than somebody who's in a sales environment.
Yes.
But the key is that you have that sense of achievement or accomplishment. But the other one is, of course, the sense of meaning. And if you can drive those or model those and get folks to focus on those 5 principles, you're going to have a flourishing person, a flourishing organization, a flourishing family. We talk about that with my kids. Is remember the Flourish principle, PERMA principles. And if you can adopt those and focus on those, be intentional about those. And so we think that those things, if you're a flourishing organization, you understand a clear vision of what we're doing, what we're all about. That is sustainable. Those are the things that they either want to be here or they don't. Sometimes employees are saying, I'm not really buying this. This isn't really for me. But then they're going to get off the next stop, right? They're not going to want to stay on the bus. You got to get the right people on the bus, got them in the right seats. The key is to get the right people with the right attitudes, and then you find something for them to do, in my view. But they got to be doing the right things. And those who really don't want to be there, most folks do come along, but you're always going to find a few that don't, and they'll get off the next stop. And that's just how you have to build your culture. That's the most important thing, is having that unified culture in the organization. And when you have that and you communicate it often, your employees, I think, are going to be, it's much more sustainable about what we do.
We always talk about the idea that purpose changes everything, because purpose, when you're having impact, not just checking tasks, but truly impacting people's lives, it provides this energy source and it provides this resilience that nothing else can. And one of the things you said is getting them to focus on that.
Right.
And often it is leaders understanding there is purpose and impact built into public service. It's just naturally there. We can still lose sight of it. If we show up every day and we do the jobs and we check the tasks, but we don't look at it, it's almost like it doesn't exist. And so we find good leaders are the ones that are always saying, hey, we went through a really hard thing just now. Don't forget about the impact. This is why this matters. Right. We celebrate a good thing. Hey, you contributed to this. That's amazing. This matters. What are y'all doing or seeing that you're successful at to get your leaders to constantly point their people to purpose and impact and the good they do?
Well, that starts with our vision. Our vision in McKinney, we set it out as, fundamentally the unit, family is your ultimate unit of social structure. You build social structure around family, but it doesn't be your nuclear family. It could be your sports family. It could be, I'm very open-minded about how you want to define family, but that is the unit of social capital. That's where it starts. And a community starts from family. However you define it. And so our vision is building a stronger, more resilient community through the power of relationships. So it's about building relationships. And we talk about it, and we do point it out. We'll say, see that built a relationship. That was a relationship that, this happy resident that we followed up on. We had some employees, we have amazing stories of employees who literally, I remember one guy was driving home from work and he helped a woman with her car. It was rainy and cold, and he helped her with her battery and went and bought her a battery. He literally went and bought the battery himself and said, don't worry about it. I paid it forward. And I'm like, that's building relationships. That's somebody who went way beyond what you would expect. And that's a city employee. The amount of credibility and help and positivity he builds for not only for the organization but for the community. that's invaluable.
Yeah.
And those little things is what we encourage our folks to do is what did you do to build a relationship today?
Yeah.
And relationships are great, right? That's what gives us fulfillment.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, when I see things on the other side, I get notifications of all the suicides that happen in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too high, right? Last year we doubled our suicides. And that's just a sense of hopelessness and loneliness and lack of connection.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge of our time is making those connections. And if we can change that, if we can somehow affect that, maybe it's in the way we design. We talk about building relationships and making connections. Our planning folks, or our parks design folks, how do we build a park where we're getting people connected together?
Yes.
So they can build those relationships.
Yeah.
Because we have so many forces pulling us apart.
Yeah.
What can we do to get people together and getting them to connect? And I think that's the challenge that I wrote about it, but that's the challenge of our time, in my view, in our role.
I agree. And I read the article you sent to me, and I agree. It's this idea that when we're disconnected, we lose that hope. We need other people to maintain hope. And I'm an extreme introvert, and yet even I understand that deeply. We need other people. And I love that you've identified relationship as this core element of the impact y'all have, because what's interesting is I'm kind of driven in the same way. Part of why we do the work we do is ultimately, I think, the high suicide rate in policing is solvable if we're willing to go down some creative roads and think about this differently. And that's how we want to spend our next 40 years, is trying to help solve that problem.
Absolutely.
And I love the idea that you can point to a suicide rate in McKinney, Texas, and say, hey, planning department, you can actually contribute to helping this come down. Let's design these parks. Let's design these spaces for connection. If you can take all the different departments and point them to that deep connection, that relationship they're building, that is magical.
Absolutely.
Y'all are doing incredible work.
Yeah.
You really are.
It's always a work in progress, and we learn from others. We see what's really great work in some other cities.
Yeah.
And some folks that I look at what they're doing. Wow, what a great idea that is.
Yeah.
We should try to do something like that.
Yeah.
We have Peter Kageyama, who wrote the book For the Love of Cities.
Yeah.
And he's out of, I think, St. Petersburg, Florida. He came and spoke to our staff, and he talks about ways in which you can send love notes to the community. You create these things that makes people they fall in love with their city. And he said, why can't we talk about love in a loving relationship between people and their place?
Yeah.
We tend to think it's very transactional, but it shouldn't be transactional. It should be emotional. Yeah. How do you build the emotional connection for people in their communities? And we've done some cool stuff in McKinney that I think is moving the ball forward in that regard. But in getting our council to recognize, if you really want to connect with your constituents, create that emotional connection to the community, rather than just if you're a transactional relationship, it's just people it's going to come and go.
I had another city manager on here, and they said, we really want people to love our city, but are we loving our people? Because we've got to do that first. And I think this even translates all the way down into leadership, because ultimately, if your people know you love them, and HR departments get a little weird when you start talking about that, but there are ways to do it that is appropriate and that is helpful, and to let people know, hey, I actually love and care about you. And when we do these group coaching sessions, or I'm speaking at a conference, I always finish it with, hey, I love you. Yeah. And I genuinely mean it. Yeah. And I think there's something to, as a city, being able to build that culture, because love is kind of that, if relational is the element that helps have the impact, love is the core of that relationship. And if it's not, then it is transactional.
Well, there's two meanings of love, right? I mean, there's love in the romantic, that sense, but there's also love in the sense of, organizationally, community-wide.
Yes.
And that's oftentimes underplayed or underappreciated.
It is.
And it's powerful. It's a very powerful motivator, I think, for folks.
I love it.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we work in a world of McClellan County is fast growing. We're growing like crazy. And there's a lot of investment, a lot of developers coming into town, and it's all about economic capital. And that is a critical part of our job, is to foster an environment where we're building economic capital. But fundamentally, we're social capitalists, right? I'm a social capitalist. Yeah. And that means our job fundamentally is, how do we build social capital to build a stronger community?
That's it.
If you're not doing that, if you don't look at that, in my view, my humble opinion as a city manager and as professional staff, we're missing the boat. Yeah. You can engineer growth, we need to build capacities.
Yeah.
Economic development is different than economic growth.
Yeah.
And that all is about building. If you have economic development, you are going to create the conditions for social capital to expand and flourish.
Yeah. We talked earlier about this idea, and we have a slide. It's the first slide that I show when I'm talking to cities. And it says that a city staff is the foundation of a thriving city. That city staff, if they're thriving, the city will do well. And we always think about it in terms of economic growth, population growth, is the city thriving? But if your team's not doing well, ultimately the city is not on a path to health.
Right.
Because you think about your staff of 1,400 people, they have hundreds of thousands of interactions with your citizens every single month. Every one of those interactions is a chance for that person to walk away going, I love this city or I hate this city.
Yeah.
And every bit of it is, how does that staff member show up? No matter what the citizen does, they may come in hot, but am I a place where I say, hey, my job is to build relationship with you even though you're upset right now? My job is to partner and help you. That type of customer service based in, I love the citizens and I want to serve them. That is what a thriving city looks like. And I think part of why we even do this podcast in the first place is to shift the conversation more in that direction, to say, can we start a movement towards sustainability for our teams? Because then they are going to build places people love to live.
You ever thought about being a city manager? Maybe you should be a city manager. I think you'd be great.
I talk a good game. I don't have the patience for it.
Listen, we all say that. We all say that. And you'd be surprised at how much patience you can. I think you're probably a very patient person. You're patient listening to my stuff for
Listen, I like things a certain way. I always tell people after 20 years of owning my own business, I'm almost unemployable.
Yeah.
Because I have very real feelings about how things should work. So, Paul, this has been the best conversation. I deeply appreciate you being on the show and sharing your experience and your wisdom with us.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. This has been my pleasure. I remembered the other acronym or the other word.
What is it?
Emotion, positive emotion, positive engagement, positive relationships. Those three are the happy ones.
Yes.
And then meaning and accomplishment or achievement.
I love that.
That's PERMA. So anyway, and focus on those as an organization, as a person, as an individual. Even if you don't want to, if you're not in a position in your organization to be able to model that organizationally, do it personally.
Yeah.
And people will follow that. They'll see, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So,
but
I appreciate your time and having me here. It's been fun.
This has been a blast.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Leading Thriving Cities. If you'd like to find out more about what we do at Forward Partners, you can find us at www.forwardpartners.net. We love partnering with cities to learn how to develop healthy leaders and thriving teams. We do that through a variety of means, from leadership coaching to online courses to facilitating retreats. If you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out. You can also find us online with all the different socials, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We are putting out content all the time, and you can find it at Forward Partner.